Hi, and welcome to another episode of MyCurrencyTransferTV. There's been a lot of discussion about Bitcoin, what it is, what it does, how it works, whether we should jump on board right now or if we're missing some good new thing. I'm hopefully going to answer some of those questions and discuss a little bit about how it works and what it means for us. So, Bitcoin. It's essentially a virtual currency, but at its essence, it is a digital file that quite simply keeps the accounts and the money a bit like a ledger. So as you can see here, people all over the world have a copy of this ledger. Now, you're thinking, why do people keep a copy of this ledger all over the world? Well, this is one fundamental difference of Bitcoin and the traditional banking system. Bitcoin allows every single person on the network to keep a copy of every single transaction that has ever happened on Bitcoin historically, right from day one. Banks, on the other hand, keep a transaction log of funds that have went into the bank and out of the bank, not of all the other banks ever. So who keeps a copy of these ledgers? Well, it's every single node, or otherwise known as a computer, on the Bitcoin network. So if you were to get a Bitcoin address and install Bitcoin on your computer will download every single transaction that has ever happened. This is part of the way that Bitcoin works, and it ensures that nothing untoward is happening, so that everybody knows what everybody else has done. But it's a bit different to knowing who did it. We'll talk a little bit about anonymity in a second. So what do these ledgers mean? What do they look like? Well, it's actually called a blockchain within the Bitcoin system. And a blockchain contains, quite simply, just information about who sent how much to who. And it would be easy if it was like this, where it said Jack sent 5 Bitcoins to Susie, but in reality, what it is it's addresses. There's a from address and a to address. And these addresses are a little bit weird and unmemorable. They're just letters and number combinations. It's a bit like an email address, just really ugly. So all of these Bitcoin blockchains keep a copy of all of the transactions that have ever happened, saying this address, send that amount to that address, and everybody has a copy of this. So, now that we know how basically it works, you must be wondering, well, where's the trust? I mean, how do you know that somebody actually sent that money and they didn't just keep it to themselves? And that's where the security of Bitcoin comes in. Bitcoin is held up by mathematical algorithms. It doesn't rely on trust whatsoever. It's actually built to work against the notion of trust. So, the way that it combats that is it mathematically checks, using cryptography, whether the transaction that is labeled to have happened actually happened. And it checks this against everybody else on the network. So there are checks in place to do this. And Bitcoin is essentially held up by a network of these mathematical algorithms. So now that we know that how Bitcoin works, you must be wondering, so who creates all these ledgers, all these blockchains? How do they work? How do you even get Bitcoins? So there are 2 ways. One way to get Bitcoins is to buy them. So you give your pounds, euros, or dollars in exchange for a certain number of Bitcoins. You can do this on online exchanges such as Mt. Gox and a host of other websites. It is these same websites, by the way, that you can convert your Bitcoins back into fiat currencies such as pounds, euros, dollars, and so forth. So that's how you would link Bitcoin with the real world currencies. But put that to one side. That's one way that you can obtain Bitcoins. You can buy them. Another way to obtain Bitcoins is to mine for them. Now that's a semi-free process. You're not exchanging your money for that. But what you are doing is you're paying in computational power in exchange for Bitcoins. I'll explain what that means. You can mine for Bitcoins using your computer. So if you leave your computer running with a certain application installed, it will churn mathematical computations which will ultimately discover a new blockchain. This blockchain benefits the system. And in return for you discovering this blockchain or assisting in the discovery of a blockchain, you are rewarded with a certain number of Bitcoins. I should say that this is quite a competitive field now, where there are people banding together and groups and organizations who are buying very complicated and heavy-duty servers, hosting them in big, massive data centers with the sole purpose of discovering blockchains. So you must be wondering, okay, so let's assume I've got a certain number of Bitcoins. What do I do with these? Do people let me pay for things? Can I buy a pizza with them? What can I do with these things? The answer is yes, you can. There are eBay-like websites online which accept Bitcoins. There are even pubs, pizza places, coffee shops that accept Bitcoins all around the world. And online you can pretty much find any supplier selling all sorts of different things, pretty much anything that you're after, and if not yet, increasingly so, who will also offer Bitcoins as payment. So how far can you take this? Can you buy a house with it? Well, not quite yet. And the main reason is down to tax and stamp duty in all countries. Governments haven't gotten around to regulating Bitcoin just yet. If you were to send 5 Bitcoins or however many Bitcoins from your computer, your address rather, to somebody else's address, there's no way to get that back. So if you were to buy a pizza that ultimately was never delivered, you're out of luck. But if you are traveling, if you are emigrating from one country to another, you can, of course, have your Bitcoins, keep them, and when you move to another country, you can convert them back into whatever currency you're moving into. So, for example, from the UK, you have your Bitcoins, 5 Bitcoins, however many you have. Once you emigrate to, let's say, Australia, you can use a system like Mt. Gox to export them, or rather exchange them, to Australian dollars. Now, this will be cheaper than converting pounds directly to Australian dollars, in terms of transfer fees and the exchange rates. So that's one way that you could start using and dabbling in Bitcoin itself. Will Bitcoin work, or is this just a fad? Is this something that I can just skip and somebody tell me when this is over and we can think about the next thing? Nobody knows. But one thing it has proven is that a virtual digital currency can work. And that's critical, because predecessors to Bitcoin, and there were a number of them, have not worked. And to date, it has been very difficult to prove that these things are worthy of our attention, time, and money. But Bitcoin has proven that it can work, and that's very important. So, even if Bitcoin itself doesn't work, one thing's for sure, it has laid the groundwork for all future virtual currency systems to build upon. And that's why everybody's excited about it, because it's made something that much more closer to reality, not relying on your traditional currencies. There's a whole world of things to explore here, and we'll link up to some of these resources that we've mentioned in the video and the blog post. But for now, I hope that answers most of your questions. Have a good day. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.